It started with a single questionable take that somehow ignited an entire football city overnight. Fans who normally accepted media criticism of their team suddenly mobilized across social platforms with unprecedented fury. A veteran reporter with decades of credibility found her reputation questioned by readers who once defended her strongest opinions. The whispers around team facilities grew louder each day as players exchanged knowing glances during practice sessions. The promising rookie showed every sign of being ready, while established media insisted otherwise, despite mounting evidence to the contrary. Local radio shows fielded angry callers demanding explanations for the obvious disconnect between what they witnessed and what they read in morning headlines. The controversy expanded beyond normal sports debate into something that threatened long-standing relationships throughout the organization. What began as routine criticism had morphed into the biggest sports media controversy Cleveland had seen in years. What could possibly cause this level of division within a fan base that historically united behind their team through countless disappointments? What transformed ordinary readers into digital activists suddenly questioning someone they'd trusted for 20 seasons of coverage? Why would respected sports professionals risk their own standing by openly challenging a colleague's judgment in such direct terms? The pressure was building towards something unprecedented in Cleveland sports history. The answer resided in a fundamental disagreement about talent evaluation that somehow escaped normal professional boundaries. Under the harsh August sun, with temperatures climbing into the high 80s, something was changing in how the public consumed sports coverage in Northeast Ohio. A talent assessment gap widened with each passing practice session, creating tension impossible to ignore. The situation wouldn't remain contained much longer. Something had to break. She'd covered the Browns through 6 head coaches and countless quarterback controversies, building respect through consistent reporting and deep organizational connections. Her insights were once considered essential reading for anyone following Cleveland football, carrying significant weight with casual fans and dedicated observers alike. Her perspective helped shape how people understood the team's decisions and future direction through both winning streaks and painful rebuilding phases. That carefully constructed credibility now faced its greatest challenge over her coverage of a single player. The veteran reporter's articles about the rookie quarterback weren't just unpopular, they had become the catalyst for citywide scrutiny of someone once considered untouchable in Cleveland media. What began as routine criticism evolved into what many viewed as an inexplicable campaign against a player showing every indication of franchise-altering talent. Readers who once defended her strongest takes now analyzed every word, looking for explanations beyond football evaluation. The shift in public perception happened with remarkable speed, catching everyone by surprise. What exactly pushed this situation beyond normal sports disagreement into something resembling a movement against established media? Was it the accumulation of dismissive tweets that minimized impressive performances captured on practice footage circulating online? Was it the articles suggesting he wasn't ready, despite coaches privately expressing amazement at his rapid development behind closed doors? Perhaps it was the growing gap between public narrative and what players themselves were saying when microphones weren't present. The disconnect wasn't just noticeable, it had become the central conversation in sports bars, office break rooms, and social media threads throughout Northeast Ohio. Mary Kay Cabot and Shedeur Sanders became unexpected adversaries in a battle neither had likely sought but now defined both their professional trajectories. The stakes extended beyond individual careers to questions about media accountability in an era where audiences had unprecedented access to information. The situation was primed for a defining moment. The criticism expanded beyond fan forums when several prominent national analysts began questioning the local coverage with unusual directness in morning sports shows. The professional courtesy typically extended between media members gradually gave way to open challenges about basic evaluation standards and observational accuracy. Emmanuel Acho, known for measured takes, visibly struggled maintaining his composure during a segment discussing the Cleveland quarterback situation. His frustration reflected growing industry concern about what he called an alternate reality of quarterback assessment. "I'm genuinely struggling to understand what's happening here," Acho said during a broadcast that quickly circulated among Browns fans seeking validation for their concerns. "We're watching identical practices, seeing identical film, yet somehow reaching completely different conclusions about fundamental quarterback evaluation." His comments represented just the beginning of industry scrutiny that would soon expand across multiple networks and platforms. The criticism was becoming impossible to dismiss as mere fan overreaction. While Shedeur demonstrated advanced processing speed and exceptional arm talent in every available practice clip, local coverage continued suggesting Kenny Pickett remained the sensible choice for long-term development. Team insiders maintained public silence while privately expressing confusion about the persistent narrative that contradicted what they witnessed daily. The discourse had moved beyond normal differences of opinion into territory that raised questions about basic observational consistency. The first significant crack appeared when an anonymous veteran receiver spoke briefly with a sideline reporter after a particularly impressive practice session in late July. "Kenny works extremely hard and has earned everyone's respect in the building," the player said, when assured his name would be protected. "But there's no comparison between what happens when Shedeur steps into the huddle. It's completely different energy, completely different ball placement, completely different ceiling." The quote spread through Cleveland fan communities like wildfire within hours. That anonymous quote represented the first public confirmation of what many suspected was happening behind closed doors at team headquarters. The situation was about to experience its defining moment during a Tuesday morning scrimmage that would permanently alter the conversation. Under the bright August sun, with humidity hanging heavy across the practice fields, what began as a routine training camp session transformed into something coaches would discuss in hushed tones for weeks afterward. The temperature matched the rising tension, 92 degrees, and climbing. The rookie quarterback unexpectedly received extended work with the first team defense during a situation normally reserved for established starters and specific developmental periods. Observers described Shedeur completing throws into coverage windows that veteran defenders couldn't believe were attempted, much less completed with consistent accuracy. His anticipation allowed receivers barely out of their breaks to find perfectly placed balls waiting in spaces that seemed impossibly tight just moments earlier. The sideline grew unusually quiet as the performance continued beyond normal repetition counts. Even coaches typically reserved in their assessments were exchanging glances that communicated more than their carefully measured words ever would about what they were witnessing. A defensive coordinator, known for his stoic demeanor, visibly shook his head after a particularly impossible completion against perfect coverage, turning away to hide what appeared to be a smile of disbelief. Players leaving the field that day shared knowing looks that required no verbal explanation about what had transpired during those 37 minutes of scrimmage time. Mary Kay Cabot's headline the following morning read, "Sanders shows potential, but questions remain about NFL readiness," while praising Kenny Pickett's steady development, despite him throwing multiple interceptions against the second-team defense. The divide between witnessed reality and published analysis had never been more pronounced or more difficult to rationalize through normal professional differences. The reaction came swiftly, as comment sections filled with thousands of responses, demanding accountability for coverage that seemed completely detached from what had transpired on the practice field. The article following the Tuesday scrimmage became the catalyst for what industry analysts would later describe as unprecedented reader response that extended far beyond normal sports disagreement. Comment sections accumulated thousands of reactions ranging from genuine confusion to outright calls for editorial intervention regarding coverage decisions. Subscription cancellations reportedly reached numbers that triggered internal meetings at the publishing company about potential financial implications. The situation had evolved from sports debate into something with measurable business consequences. The frustration centered on what appeared to be constantly shifting evaluation criteria applied exclusively to Shedeur, while being conspicuously absent from analysis of other players in similar development stages. When he mastered one aspect, the focus would immediately shift to another area without acknowledging the progress demonstrated. When teammates visibly gravitated toward him between drills, the coverage pivoted to questions about off-field focus without addressing his demonstrated commitment. The inconsistency in assessment standards became impossible to ignore. What made the situation particularly striking was the rookie's composed response throughout the growing controversy surrounding his position on the depth chart. While speculation intensified across media platforms, Shedeur maintained professional focus on daily improvement, relationship building with teammates, and community engagement without publicity teams documenting his efforts. Local teachers reported him visiting classrooms in underserved neighborhoods with no cameras present, focusing on genuine connection rather than image management. His maturity contrasted sharply with the chaotic narrative surrounding him. The situation extended beyond football into conversations about evaluation bias, institutional resistance to change, and media accountability in modern sports coverage. The dimensions of the story expanded daily as national outlets began examining the situation through lenses ranging from sports psychology to organizational behavior to journalism ethics. What had begun as a local quarterback controversy was transforming into a case study that would likely appear in sports management textbooks regardless of how it ultimately resolved in coming weeks. The rookie quarterback carried not just his own reputation, but a family legacy deeply connected to football intelligence and professional excellence that couldn't be separated from evaluation conversations. His father's Hall of Fame career represented more than athletic achievement. It showcased a cerebral approach to the game that clearly influenced his son's remarkable understanding of concepts typically requiring years of professional experience. Football evaluation and strategy discussions had likely been dinner table conversation throughout his childhood and developmental years. The resistance to acknowledging his readiness raised increasingly uncomfortable questions about what was actually driving coverage decisions beyond normal professional assessment. Was it simply the difficulty of adjusting an established narrative once publicly committed through multiple articles and television appearances? Was it related to relationships within the organization, creating conflicting loyalties that complicated objective analysis? These questions circulated through Cleveland football conversations in settings ranging from sports bars to corporate suites. The situation transcended normal sports debate, becoming symbolic of broader questions about institutional resistance to innovation and change within traditional evaluation frameworks. The quarterback represented a new approach to the position, more dynamic, more versatile, more comfortable with creative problem solving, while still respecting fundamental structure. The conventional metrics seemed inadequate for assessing his particular talents and potential impact on an offense designed around different quarterback attributes than those he possessed. Local businesses found creative ways to comment on the controversy, with several popular bars creating themed drinks that captured the frustration many felt watching the situation unfold throughout August practices. The Status Quo Special was described as an overpriced, watered-down cocktail, while the Future contained exciting combinations but remained unavailable on the official menu despite customer demand. The humor reflected something deeper, a community recognizing familiar patterns that historically preceded painful missed opportunities they'd witnessed too many times before. The financial dimension emerged unexpectedly when several local businesses that traditionally purchased significant advertising during Brown's coverage began quietly redirecting their marketing budgets toward individual player endorsements instead. Season ticket holders, already frustrated by years of disappointing quarterback play, contacted the organization directly, questioning decisions with unprecedented specificity about player evaluation. Corporate sponsors reportedly expressed concerns about association with what increasingly appeared to be organizational dysfunction rather than thoughtful development processes. The economic pressure created an entirely new dynamic in what had previously remained strictly football operations territory without business interference. Marketing executives suddenly found themselves included in discussions traditionally reserved for coaching staff and player personnel departments. Revenue projections became relevant to conversations about roster decisions and player development. The business side of the organization, typically separate from football decisions, began asking pointed questions about reasoning behind the current depth chart and its potential impact on the brand. The reaction felt painfully familiar to longtime Cleveland fans who had witnessed promising talent overlooked, traded, or misused, only to flourish elsewhere in organizations better structured to recognize and develop their abilities. The collective anxiety stemmed from institutional memory rather than irrational attachment to a single player regardless of performance. The passionate response represented accumulated wisdom from years of similar situations with predictably disappointing outcomes. The pattern recognition triggered alarm bells throughout the fan base. The message was becoming impossible to ignore, as it translated from social media complaints to measurable business impacts that demanded organizational attention at the highest levels of the company. Sources familiar with internal discussions reported growing tension between departments that typically operated independently within the organizational structure. The controversy had exposed fundamental questions about communication, evaluation processes, and accountability measures that extended far beyond a single roster decision or media relationship. The pressure built from multiple directions simultaneously, creating what organizational behavior experts might describe as a perfect storm of accountability with no easy resolution available. The fan base, analysts, former players, and current teammates all signaled their positions through increasingly transparent actions and statements. The unified message from these diverse groups created momentum that would ultimately force organizational response at the highest levels. The situation had reached a critical inflection point. Current teammates expressed support for Shedeur through actions rather than potentially controversial statements that might create additional tension with coaching staff. The locker room delivered a clear message through behavior while maintaining professional respect for the established hierarchy. Their collective vote of confidence came through consistent daily choices rather than headline-generating comments that could potentially damage team cohesion during a critical developmental period. The silence spoke volumes about their assessment. The organization maintained official support for the current quarterback development plan, while behind-the-scenes discussions reportedly intensified about necessary adjustments based on performance rather than fixed timelines. Coaches defended their original roadmap publicly, while privately acknowledging the growing evidence suggesting acceleration might be appropriate given demonstrated capabilities. The gap between public statements and private assessments became increasingly difficult to maintain without damaging relationships throughout the building. The tension was palpable in every press interaction. The situation reached critical mass when multiple sources reported an emergency ownership meeting had been called specifically to address the quarterback situation and its broader implications for organizational direction. What began as a routine budget discussion reportedly transformed into fundamental conversation about football operations, media relationships, and communication processes. The normally hands-off ownership group had apparently decided direct intervention was necessary, given the potential long-term consequences of continuing along the current path without significant adjustment. Inside the emergency meeting, according to 3 separate sources familiar with the discussions, conversations quickly moved beyond routine organizational matters to address the fundamental disconnect between public narrative and field performance regarding quarterback evaluation. Voices were reportedly raised to unusual levels, as different departments presented conflicting perspectives on how the situation should be handled moving forward. The typically separate business and football operations found themselves in direct confrontation about short and long-term implications. Financial projections presented by the marketing department showed concerning trends in ticket sales, merchandise revenue, and sponsor commitments if the current situation continued without resolution or clear explanation. Football operations defended their initial approach while acknowledging mounting evidence that adjustments might be necessary based on performance rather than predetermined schedules. Media relations expressed growing difficulty maintaining credibility with important outlets given the widening gap between official statements and what reporters observed directly. The ownership group, after listening to all perspectives, reportedly made their position unmistakably clear regarding organizational priorities moving forward. Football decisions would remain with football operations, but those decisions needed to reflect observable reality rather than rigid adherence to original plans that no longer matched current circumstances. The message delivered wasn't about specific personnel choices, but about evaluation integrity and communication consistency. The directive focused on process rather than particular outcomes or individuals. The meeting concluded with a clear mandate to reassess the quarterback situation, based strictly on merit and performance, rather than external factors, or fixed timelines that no longer matched reality. While no direct order regarding depth chart changes was issued, the implication was unmistakable to everyone present. Talent evaluation must align with on-field evidence regardless of previous public commitments or narrative convenience. The organization had reached its defining moment with implications that would extend far beyond the current controversy. Cleveland fans have demonstrated remarkable patience through disappointments that would have broken less resilient fan bases long ago, creating unique perspective on current developments. They've endured through a parade of quarterbacks showing promise, but never delivering consistent success for reasons ranging from talent limitations to organizational dysfunction to simple misfortune and bad timing. They've maintained financial and emotional support through rebuilding efforts that seemed perpetual rather than transitional phases leading to stability. The current situation represents more than typical sports disagreement. It reflects a community using hard-earned wisdom to identify warning signs they've seen repeatedly throughout decades of following the franchise through its most difficult periods. The trust in their pattern recognition isn't irrational, but based on consistently observed organizational behavior that has limited sustained success despite occasional promising seasons. Their collective voice represents legitimate concern based on historical precedent rather than emotional overreaction to a single roster decision. With final roster decisions approaching and regular season preparation intensifying, the pressure inside the organization has reportedly reached unprecedented levels, according to multiple sources with direct knowledge of internal discussions. The coaching staff meetings have grown increasingly tense as performance metrics conflict with the initial development approach that guided public communication about the quarterback position. The disconnect between private assessment and public narrative has become unsustainable for all parties involved in the decision-making process. The decisions made in the coming 72 hours will reveal whether the organization has truly evolved beyond historical patterns or remains trapped in approaches that have consistently failed to deliver the success the passionate fan base deserves. The quarterback controversy has become about much more than individual players or media members. It now represents a fundamental test of institutional adaptability and evaluation processes. The next chapter could permanently alter the trajectory of multiple careers and potentially an entire franchise for years to come.